You know, God made provisions for lizards, but really God created everything with provisions. God made provisions for all of us. I want to go back to the book of Psalms for just a moment. In Psalms 103, I want you to think about the psalmist in one place says that he is fearfully and wonderfully made, and he is in awe of his body. But I want you to think about the provisions that God has made for us. God made us with certain abilities to be able to provide for us. He made us with certain capabilities that other creatures don't have. And God did that for all of his creation, providing for each and every small part of his creation with this idea that they would be able to sustain life and to be successful and continue life on this earth. In the 103rd Psalm, verse 19, the psalmist says, "The Lord has established his thrones in the heaven, and his kingdom rules over all." So God rules everything. He sets the boundaries for which things can live. He sets the standard by which they live. So when I was looking at fence lizards, I discovered something in a fence lizard that is happening. Apparently, part of the fence lizard's territory has been invaded by fire ants. Fence lizards eat ants. But the fire ant is capable of actually killing a fence lizard by its fiery sting. Well, guess what? One article I read was talking about these fence lizards, and it was making it sound like these fence lizards, by their own sheer willpower, have developed thicker skin to prevent the fire ant sting from getting them. I'll tell you what God has done. God built into the fence lizard a number of different thicknesses of skins based on the local species of fence lizards. And what we're seeing is merely a natural selection of God's creation. We're seeing fence lizards get thicker skin. That the fence lizards that have thicker skin are surviving the fire ants. It's not that they are evolving in the sense that they are changing their species. What God has provided has been there all along in part of the fence lizard population. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28 talks about God's providence and his care for his creation. Romans chapter 8, let's go back there for a moment in verse 28. Romans 8, verse 28, the Apostle Paul tells us, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified." If God is able to provide for fence lizards against their enemies, how much more so is God capable of providing for us? Now let's look at one little thing that God also provided for the fence lizards. And Sarah didn't know this one until last night. She was digging for information on this lesson last night, so I gave her a couple of tidbits. You know, when I used to chase a fence lizard, I learned very early on, you don't grab them by the tail. Because if you grab them by the tail, God made fence lizards' tails to come off in your hands. And I would hold this tail and the tail would be wiggling around in my fingers. But the fence lizard would be long gone. Now, is that not too weird? God built into the fence lizard's tail certain places that it could break. If you grab the tip of his tail, the tip will pop off. If you grab him closer to his behind, you'll get the whole tail, or pretty much the whole tail. See, God made that into the fence lizard as part of his providential care for the fence lizard. He made them with that mechanism of self-defense, so that when an enemy grabs their tail, they simply let go of the tail and run away. And did you know that they can regrow their tail? See, here's a picture of a little fence lizard with only part of a tail. That tail is regrowing after it's been popped off. Something caught that little feller by his tail. Probably a little silence or something like that. Caught that fence lizard by its tail, and that allowed him to escape from his enemies. You think about what God does for us sometimes with our enemies. Our enemies, sometimes all they want to grasp is our tail. And sometimes God allows us to escape, and all we might lose is something that we can regain. He reminds me to a certain point of what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and in verse 9. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and in verse 9, the Apostle Paul says, "But he said to me," God said to the Apostle Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am counted with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." So the Apostle Paul is kind of, to a certain point, like a fence lizard. God created certain weaknesses for Paul's benefit and for others around him's benefit. And God created a weak places in the fence lizard's tail so that he might escape his enemies.